I have saved the best for last, of course, being able to talk about a GPU, a graphics processing unit. Now, even though I have saved this for last, you could, in theory, actually build an entire system just around the GPU. If gaming is your purpose, if gaming is your focus, if gaming is what you do, the GPU is the absolute most important thing out of your entire system. Next to thermals, of course. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can select the appropriate Nvidia GPU for you, how you can look at the available data that is out there, interpret it properly, and then ultimately make a decision that is going to be best for your wallets and for your gaming experience needs. I am TheGrayingTech, a gaming insider, and this is the Project 7 series. Long-form, detailed review of how to build a gaming system here in 2021. If you're into gaming performance content like this, why don't you go ahead and click that like button, maybe even consider subscribing. So starting off, I have to get rid of the elephant that is obviously in the room. GPUs are extremely hard to find. The ones that are the best price to performance ratios are even harder to find. It sucks. There's nothing I can do about it, and I know that this kind of content is already controversial because people get upset that, oh, why are you doing content about stuff I can't get a hold of? Nothing I can do about it. Really nothing. If you're building a gaming system, you got to find a GPU. I'm here to tell you, hopefully, how you can find a good one if you actually get some options. But ultimately, even I had to just grab what I had available to me from a Newegg shuffle. All right, so kicking us off, the other elephant in the room, this is a Radeon 6900 XT. This is what I put into Project Red Star. That was an all AMD build. This build, Project 7, is Intel and Nvidia. As such, I will only be discussing Nvidia today, but you obviously have a choice between AMD and Nvidia. My thoughts on this matter. Nvidia has a very good streaming codecs. It has a very good rendering codecs. It is very, very useful if you are doing things in addition to just playing a video game. I really like what Nvidia has done here. AMD, on the other hand, because of the community, you have the access to the more power tool, which allows you to add additional voltage controls. It allows you to have additional power controls. You can do a lot to control an AMD GPU that you kind of can only dream of doing on the Nvidia side of the house. So if you are choosing between the two of them, there it is. That is my thought process on the differences between the two. I'm not going to go into more detail than that. So what do you need to consider when you are looking at a GPU? Well, the first and probably most important thing, what resolution are you planning on playing at? Are you a 4K? Are you a 1440p, which is what Project 7 is about? Are you a 1080p? That's where you have to start. If your monitor today only supports 1080p, it doesn't make sense to look at reviews and look at data that talks about 4K. Next up, refresh rate. Now, refresh rate is how fast your monitor is able to change the image over time, and it's measured in seconds. So if you want 360 frames per second, and your monitor will show 360 frames per second, that obviously makes a bigger impact and a bigger difference than if you're looking at 60 frames per second for the monitor, thus 60 frames per second for the GPU. Resolution, refresh rates, those work together to give you the overall experience, and both of these are determined by your monitor. So that is really where the first consideration line comes in, after price, of course. Next up, we have quality. What do I mean by quality? How pretty do you want your games to be? Are you somebody that absolutely has to have anti-aliasing on? Are you somebody that wants a lot of extra shadows, texture, detail, huge field of views? If you are looking to enable a lot of those extra features, that's also going to play a role here. That's going to be determined also by your resolution. Higher the resolution and the higher the quality, the harder the GPU has to work. The lower the resolution, along with a high quality, you actually can get away with a less powerful GPU because you're not working the GPU as hard. So these are the three areas that you mainly have to trade off on. Now, some other considerations. Are you streaming? Are you recording content? And I'm not just talking about the occasional, headshot here or acing or, quantikill, pentakill, that sort of thing. I'm talking about, are you actually actively engaged on trying to get on Twitch or on YouTube, Facebook gaming, whichever platform that you are streaming to? If that's the case, you do have to bring this into consideration as well. A more beefier GPU might be necessary so that you can maintain the frames and the resolution that you're expecting while still being able to stream. Additionally, are you doing any form of video editing? Content creation is becoming even more important. There are certain GPUs that are very good for content creation. There are certain CPUs that are very good for content creation. You can get an excellent CPU-GPU combination if you are looking for video editing, but it has to be one of those things you're actually looking for. The last consideration here is the power and the space. I always recommend a mid-sized tower for most gamers. If you are looking for something that is very compact and small, space becomes a significant consideration. Cards are getting larger, not just in terms of length, but also depth. So how far they stick out from the motherboard. These dimensions are always growing, it seems like, and space is becoming a premium. Additionally, these cards are getting more and more power hungry. That means you not only have to have a higher end PSU, power supply unit, but you need one that has more watts as well. Therefore, it's going to cost you more. So the more beefier of a card that you're looking for, the more beefier of a PSU you're looking for, and now you're actually having to add additional costs that maybe you didn't factor in before. So there are a lot of different processing units on both an AMD and an Nvidia graphics card. We don't necessarily need to know what they are in this video, but it is important to understand the higher the number, theoretically, the more powerful the processor itself is. We also will see things like the number of cores to price ratios. And in theory, it should be linear, but it's not. Higher the core count, the harder it is to manufacture that chip. You're going to see this in both the CPU and the GPU space. The more expensive, the more higher end, the more what we call full fat cards are harder to manufacture because you have less opportunity for error in order to make that card. What do I mean by all this? Simplify it down. If I need a GPU that has 10,000 perfectly working cores, and on the wafer that I'm creating, the upper limit for each of the cores is 10,500. It can only be off by 500. So that makes it harder in order to get what they call the yield of that 10,000. But the second class of that would be 8,000. So now I have a much bigger buffer, a much bigger margin of error where I don't need as many cores to actually be fully working. The upper echelon of the cards, the very expensive top tier hero cards, manufacturers drive a higher price there. Now, some of that is legitimate because you have more cores. Some of that is legitimate because of the yield challenges. And then the last portion of it is just greed. Welcome to business, unfortunately. So let's take a look at the core, counter, and price ratios for all of NVIDIA's line in the 3000 series. Starting off here, we have CUDA cores. Now, CUDA cores are the main things that are responsible for most of your 3D rendering and things like that. This is your bread and butter of the card, and you can see the core counts are very high, starting in the mid 3000s, and they do quickly climb. And the relationship with price here tends to go in the same direction, besides the 3070 Ti, which we'll get at here in a bit. Then I want you to note what happens here with the 3080. A huge jump in CUDA counts, but not a huge jump in price. Let's see now what happens with the 3080 Ti. Not as huge of a jump, still good, but you can see the price curve is really starting to dial it up. And then, of course, the 3090 comes along, and it's almost a flat CUDA core, but it's still a big price jump. So you can see the trend lines. The trend line does show that the price per CUDA ratio does increase when you get into that higher upper tier hero kind of a card. Same thing is true here with the Tensor cores. Tensor cores tend to trace along the price. The 3080 gives you a huge jump. And then, of course, we level off with the Ti and the 3090. Ray tracing cores. This is the newer technology, gives you beautiful detail, beautiful shadows. Well, the ray tracing cores also follow a similar pattern as all of the others. The 3080 simply gives you more for less of a price jump. 3080 Ti and 3090 don't. Lastly, we have memory. Now, I had to divide this into two categories. The 3060 Ti, and the 3070 uses traditional GDDR6. That's a kind of memory technology. While the 3070 Ti and above use GDDR6X. Theoretical bandwidth for GDDR6X is twice as high as the regular GDDR6. So you're basically getting higher performance RAM, and they're going to charge you a premium for that. Micron does charge more for that kind of RAM as well, so there is some legitimacy there. That RAM is a bit more expensive, so therefore they're going to pass the costs along to you. That's more or less to be expected. Now, the other thing that I've noticed here is Nvidia did something very weird with the 3060. I'm not sure exactly why they gave it so much extra RAM, but they did. And then, of course, they brought it right back down for the 3060 Ti, 3070 Ti. So we can see our memory kind of flatlines between those three, but we're increasing our price overall because essentially you're not paying for more memory for those cards, nor are you paying for faster memory until you get to the 3070 Ti. So memory here is a little bit weird, but we do look at the jump from 3070 to the 3080. We do increase, and now we're starting to increase the amount of memory that we have until we get to the 3090, which has an absurd amount of memory involved with it. So how can you understand all of this? Well, this right here is a polynomial trend line looking specifically at CUDA cores, memory, and price. And you can see that the 3070 to 3080 is kind of that sweet spot. We have good CUDA performance overall. We have good pricing to some degree. The 3080 Ti, the 3090 price goes really high, really fast. Yes, you're getting more memory for that, but you're not getting more CUDA cores. So that does tend to be problematic. And here is that same bit of information, just simply looking at the raw numbers of the cards. Again, this 3080 spot right here is very unique. And I'm going to talk about this in just a little bit. But for some reason, Nvidia priced the 3080 right here when they might have priced it up here. Now you can see the sweet spot, at least I think for price, is right around here. Getting good CUDA counts, you're getting a good amount of memory, the price isn't getting too high. So this is one way that you can interpret all of this information. And you can tell this was at least some amount of work. So what if you're not interested in doing that work yourself? Well, there's two guides that I want to show you. Tom's Hardware and GPU Check. So Tom's Hardware has benchmarks and a hierarchy for their 2021 cards. They have a very good rundown where they basically say the 3090 is the top card, and then they show you the score percentage that you could achieve with that. They are missing something pretty significant here though. Price. Price comes into a big consideration for most gamers making these purchases. Now, they did, to some degree, bring price into the second review that they provided, which is the best graphics card shortlist, which is right here. I want to call out this right here, this section right here. You can see from a performance standpoint, the 6800, the 3070, the 67XT, very good, and they match their corresponding price numbers here as well. So what Tom's Hardware is looking at is essentially what's the best bang for the buck, and they're pointing it out to you right here, the 7 series, which is why this is called Project 7. But there's a third way that we can look at this. If you enjoy gaming performance content, consider clicking that like button, maybe even subscribing. If you're already a subscriber, please visit patreon.com/TheGrayingTech to learn how you can help me pay it forward. And that's where GPU Check is going to come in. Now, I've used this site before. I've mentioned it before when we were looking at how to properly allocate the expenditures for your rig. This site is atrocious for advertisements. I have my ad blocker on. I almost had to just take a screenshot of this. This is so bad. But they're doing something pretty awesome, and that is they are aggregating the scores from several, I think they say, yes, 7,000 benchmark tests from numerous reputable sources, including Tom's Hardware. They're aggregating all of that information for you right here. Immediately, anybody who knows the GPU market right now knows this number right here is wrong. The 3080 Ti is $1,199, not $799. If it was $799, that would be amazing, but it's not. So how do you look at this and interpret it? So the first thing, are you a 1080p, 1440p, or a 4K gamer? Well, in this case, we're doing 1440p. So we're going to look at the yellow column. Now, the next thing that we have to consider is the price. So I don't necessarily want to spend more than $400 to $500 for my GPU. So I'm going to be looking for prices that are around that number. And we can see two right here, 400, 500. Then if I look at the average for 1440p, I see 133 and I see 113. And then we have the 6700, that's the AMD card, which is right there. If I'm looking in the $400 to $500 price range, I can see two cards that immediately make sense right here. And additionally, this AMD card right here. So for $100 more, I can go from 113 to 133. That's 20 average XPS more for $100. I'm probably going to consider that, honestly. That seems like a good deal. That's, again, why I recommend the 7 series, the 3070 in this case. Now, the other thing that I want to point out, and this is just so that you know how to interpret this in the future, you also have this index right here. So the index is taking all of these average FPSs, bringing price into consideration, and then trying to give you the best price to performance value. The 3080, the 6800 XT, these are phenomenally priced cards with a great amount of horsepower behind them. The differences between these two numbers and these two numbers and these two numbers is not significant enough. So if you're an AMD fanboy, get the 6800 XT. If you're an Intel fanboy, get the 38, if you can find them. These are phenomenally priced, super performing cards. They are doing amazingly well, which is why they are impossible to find. Bringing the price down just a little bit, you have the 6800 right here, and you have the Ti. Now, I don't necessarily agree with their interpretation that the Ti here is this great of a value, because for $100 less, I'm willing to give up 6 additional average frames. Like, that's the difference here, which just goes to show you they really did not price the 3070 Ti well at all, which is why I cannot recommend anybody look at this card. The only reason I have the 3070 Ti is because I couldn't find the 3070, and I had to buy what I could get my hands on, which is the current situation. So this is another way that you can interpret all of this information to help you get the right card for you. Now, the last thing that you need to think about, do you get the Founders Edition or do you get a third party? Do you get a reference design or a third party? What is a third party? This is a picture of an EVGA. This happens to be a 3080 right here. This was designed by EVGA, meaning they put in all of the work to figure out how to put the chip on a piece of PCB, what the PCB layout was, what the entire board was going to be, what the thermal solution was going to be. You compare this to what Nvidia and AMD put out, those are reference designs or spec designs or founders editions. That is what AMD and Nvidia think that the card should look like. Those are all set to a certain spec. When a third party like an EVGA or Gigabyte build those cards, they build it to that spec design. And then the market has a lot of those cards kind of available. But then the third party also goes and they build their own as well. When you're looking at third party, you are going to get lower bend GPUs, especially with Nvidia. Nvidia keeps the best GPU cores and processors for themselves. But you can get higher quality memory, meaning one company might use Sinex, another company might use Micron, and they might have a higher quality of memory from those Micron chips. In other words, they specify tighter timings or they specify different voltage settings. You certainly will get higher quality memory with a much more expensive third-party GPU like this EVGA. The VRM solution will also be slightly beefier with third-party. Now, I covered VRMs when I talked about motherboards, but essentially this is the power that is being delivered to your processor in order for it to do its job. It's expecting a steady power rate. The VRM solution is there to ensure that that steady power is being delivered without generating too much extra heat. So the better the VRMs and the more of them that they are, the better your thermal solution is going to be at being able to remove that heat from the card, which brings us to factory overclocking. Even though the GPU itself has not bend as well as what Nvidia is going to have, you will get a secondary bending process where the EVGAs, the gigabytes of the world, go through, retest these chips in order to make sure that they can put them into gold, silver, and bronze tiers. And then they will factory overclock the gold ones so that you get a higher than base boost and sometimes higher base clocks than what you would get with a reference design. Now, what I really like about some of the higher end EVGAs, they also include an overclock preset, which you can just toggle on with a simple switch, which is really convenient as well. Lastly, the thermal solution on these tends to be a lot beefier. You're going to have bigger cards. You're going to have thicker cards. You're going to have different airflow designs. It's designed to keep the card cooler. It's also designed to allow for longer sustained boost, which theoretically should lead to better overall frames per second than a reference design. The biggest con out of all of these, none of these are going to be priced at MSRP. At the lowest possible end, I have seen maybe one or two cards that are around the MSRP price, but most of the time they're $100 to sometimes $300 to $400 more expensive than the base reference design cards. That means you are spending a lot if you get these third-party designed cards. That's a trade-off that you're going to have to evaluate, and you're going to have to figure out if that makes sense for you. Current situation, I'm sorry, we kind of all are grabbing whatever we can get our hands on. Now, there's one other thing you might hear, and that's Crossfire, which is an AMD term, SLI, which is an Nvidia term, or asynchronous GPU compute, which is actually a Microsoft technology. They're all dead. Effectively, this entire market has been killed. This was supposed to allow you to use more than one GPU to render the scene of a game on a screen. And at a time, it kind of worked. You could get upwards of 50% of a performance boost by doing this. Well, Nvidia, then AMD, and ultimately Microsoft just kind of backed away from this whole thing. It required a lot of work on the part of the game developers. A lot of the times, the game developers weren't putting in the effort in order to really truly enable this, so we never got great overall linear performance. Like I said, you'd only get about 50% overall, and ultimately it just completely died off. So you're stuck with the one card that you get. You're going to play games on one card, so you have to factor that in when you're trying to make this decision. Now that I have gone through all of that, I've already said I have a 3070 Ti. I am super excited to open the box, take a look at it. I have resisted that temptation for 4 weeks now as I've been recording this series. I can finally unbox it, and you can check that video out when it posts right here.